Welcome to level 2 of core training. We're going to start with some planks. So come down onto your mat. That's really all you need. You can even do this on your carpet if you wanted. Coming down on your knees, make sure your knees are all the way together. So pressing your knees together. And then just bring your feet a little bit up off the floor. So if you need some extra padding for your knees, you're welcome to put something else under them. Make sure your elbows are under your shoulders and your hands are parallel. So as soon as you clasp your hands, you're going to be using a little bit more shoulder than I'd like. So just keep it nice and parallel and come into this happy plank position. Make sure your core is engaged. And then very slowly, you're going to lift one arm at a time, just tapping the top of the mat and coming back. And then we'll switch, going to the other side here. So the goal here is to try to keep your hips as straight as possible. You know, it's harder than it looks. The more you move your hips and shift your weight, the less we're doing here. So just take your time with it. Almost squeeze your core a little harder as you reach. So it's going to go from engaged here to engaged even a little bit harder as you reach. And why don't you try for 10 to 20 on each side, really slow here, going side to side, one arm at a time. Let's go 3 more. Let's squeeze your core a little bit tighter, but knees on the ground. Perfect. All right, take it down for a second and let's go to side planks. So next one, we're gonna start on one side. Side plank with a leg lift. This is so great for both your oblique and your hips. So you're going to start with your elbow under your shoulder here, and you can keep your bottom knee down for the modified position. So if that's a little bit easier for you, that's totally fine. Other knees stacked on top. Yep. And then press your hips straight up and hand here. Good. So let's bring this back in. There you go. So it's like you're being pushed between 2 panes of glass, okay? So make sure everything is nice and flat here. Your shoulders are stacked, your hips are stacked, okay? Squeezing more of this oblique on the inside here. Now staying controlled, you're gonna lift this top leg, just about up to my hand here, Brooke. There you go, nice. And then slowly lower back down. So just nice and easy up to right here, Probably lift your hip up a little bit. Yeah. Good. All right, tuck your elbow a little bit more under your shoulder. Yep, there it is. So even though you're mostly working this underside here, you're still going to keep the front part of your core engaged, and you're going to use your glute and your hip to stay stable here on both sides as you lift your leg. If you want to make it harder, you can go just stacking both of your feet in a full side plank here. And same thing, come up to my hand. Yep, there you go, and back down. So make sure your hip doesn't drop, okay? Keep it up nice and high. There you go. And lifting up to here. Good, how about just one more? Yep, beautiful. So if you want to make it harder, just go full plank, and then we'll switch sides. Modified, so bottom knee is down, coming straight up here. Let's shift your hips this way. There you go. Shoulders back. Perfect. And then leg lifting up to here. Good. So this is a really great exercise to teach your body stability. If you don't have good enough hip muscles to support, your hip tends to want to fall down towards the floor as you try to lift this leg. So just make sure you're trying to keep your hip up, go really slow, do the best that you can. Again, if you want to make it harder, you can do a full plank, side plank, stacking your shoulders, bring this hip forward, and probably not quite so high. Yeah, it's harder. Look up to my hand. There you go. Good job. Just one more. Perfect. Nice. Laying all the way on your back. Next one, we're going to do an opposite arm, opposite leg lower. This is good for both the front part of your core and coordination. So you're going to start with your hands straight up over your shoulders. You're going to start with your knees over your hips. If your hamstrings are too tight, you can always bend your knees. So if you bend your knees a little bit. Okay, so it doesn't matter if your heels are not above your hips. It really just matters that your knees are. So you can bend your knees if you need. So on an inhale here, slowly lower an opposite arm, opposite leg. Good. And then on your exhale, kind of push belly button down toward the floor and bring everything back to center. And then we'll switch. So other side, inhale on your way down. Exhale, squeezing together. So it's easy to use your quad to do some of this work. Really stay focused on trying to have that come from your abs, bringing your limbs back together. So really slow and controlled on the way down. You don't want to actually like touch the floor. So you can see that Brooke's getting really close, but not quite all the way down. Just nice and controlled here. Slow, and make sure you're breathing. The exhale helps you contract just a little bit better. Let's go 2 more here. So I would try for about 16 to 20 of these as well, just taking it nice and controlled. You can make this harder by squeezing your abs harder, so just push yourself here. All right, next one in the mix, we're gonna do fire hydrants. This is gonna work the side of your glute, and as we talked about before, your glutes are an essential part of your core. Anything that's stabilizing your pelvis and the base of your spine is critical. So this is going to work the side here. You're going to come in an all-fours position. Make sure your wrist is right under your shoulder, and make sure your knees are under your hips, okay? And then just one leg at a time, you're going to lift one knee out as far as you can without twisting your spine too much here. It's just a slow coming out and coming back down. So you can see shoulders are staying pretty much the same, core and spine are staying the same. You don't want to torque too far just for the sake of getting your knee up. And I would, maybe start with 15. You can work your way up to even 30 or 40 if you're feeling adventurous. And you should just be feeling it in this side area here when you're done. If you're feeling it too low in your IT band, you may need to bring your knee further back to ensure that your glute is actually firing and not having this low IT band do the work. Go ahead and switch sides. So after 15 or 20, go ahead and switch sides. Maybe stay a little bit straighter. There you go. And with anything that you do, even though you're working your glutes right now, you do want to just keep your core lightly engaged. Always like to put it on a scale of 1 to 10. So it's probably at maybe a 3 or a 4. It's just enough to keep everything stable without squeezing and crunching really hard. Just kind of engage those muscles towards your spine. All right, so next we're going to go on to bird dog. So you can stay in the same position as you did before. You're going to keep your core a little bit more engaged than you did in the last one. And you're going to slowly extend through your core, opposite arm, opposite leg, lifting, and then slowly lowering. So the ideal goal here is to make sure that your head is looking down. You want your neck and your spine to just be one flat line here. Okay, so if you crank your head up, it's going to make your neck hurt a little bit later. So go nice and slow. You don't need to lift up high. You're really just extending out. So your hand roughly ends up by your ear. Your leg is roughly at the level of your hip. Good. And you're trying not to get a whole lot of movement from your hip. So sometimes you see people drop into the hip that they're standing on. So just take your time. Try to stay as flat as you possibly can. All right, to make it a little bit harder, you can stay on the same side. So still reaching an opposite arm, opposite leg out, but then really slowly tucking your knee in towards your elbow to touch underneath you and then reach out again. So just stay on that same side. It requires a little bit more balance, a little bit more mobility. So as your body starts to loosen, you might try this version here just to make it a little bit more challenging. Go ahead and switch sides. And maybe try for about 10 on each side. Really great for your balance. It's okay to round just a little bit on the way in. You're trying to crunch your abs forward and then extend through your abs on the way out. That's perfect. Give me one more. Reaching in and extending out. Great. Then coming all the way down, hands are gonna be in front of you. And we're gonna go to some Supermans here. So lift just a little bit off the ground with all 4 limbs. Probably the most important part of this, you guys, is that you keep a neutral spine here. So if you arch, like if you arch really high, Brooke, this is too much on your low back, so come down a little bit. You just want to keep a nice flat spine here. So just take your time. It does not matter how far you can lift off the ground. And then you're going to lift an opposite arm, opposite leg, just a little bit higher and back down without touching, and then lifting opposite arm, opposite leg. So it's a very small, controlled movement, you guys, just really controlled. It's mainly your glute firing in the back here and shoulder blade muscles firing in the front. But it's a good crossbody pattern to do to strengthen the back half of your body, which is called the posterior chain. So just take your time. You can maybe even bring your head down a little bit so your neck and spine is in alignment here. And try maybe for 10 to 20. You can always work your way up to 40 or 50. This is a really great one to do, again, just to help strengthen the back half of your body. All right, moving on to leg circles. These are really great for your hip flexors and all the little muscles that go around your hips. This helps loosen them as well as strengthen them, which makes it a great core exercise. So you're just gonna lay flat on your back. Hands can just be straight down at your side. We're gonna go one leg at a time, bringing your leg up and then bringing it out almost to the ground without actually touching and coming back up. I think it helps to kind of extend through your heel, so you're flexing your foot just a little bit. Most people have really tight calf muscles and even hamstring muscles, so this is going to help elongate that back half of your body, which is really important. So it's common that you might have a hip that pops when you do this. If there's no pain with the popping, everything should be fine. You can always make your circle just a little bit smaller to avoid that range of motion where it pops. As your hips loosen, it will go away. Switch directions here. So after you go clockwise for a little bit, you can go counterclockwise. I would try for 10 circles in each direction, just taking it really slow, getting the best range of motion that you can. On the way up especially, you should feel your core doing some of that work. So you are going to pull up from this adductor a little bit, but also from your core. So it's going to get all of that girdle around your leg as well as your core. Why don't you switch sides? Also, don't forget about breathing. Okay, so whenever the motion is the hardest, it helps to exhale. So if it's the hardest to pull your leg up, which it probably will be, exhale when you pull your leg up. Breathe in and inhale as your leg comes down and around. Exhale on your way up. Just make sure you're breathing. On that exhale, you're probably going to contract your core just a little bit harder, keeping everything in tight. When we switch directions, coming back around. Perfect. And hips are staying on the floor. So Brooke is doing a really good job. You don't want to let this hip come off the ground to rotate over when you're doing any of these circles. Just keep everything flat on the floor and take your time. So if your hip wants to come up, if your leg goes really far out, start with a smaller range of motion and work your way up. Nice, let's get one more here. Round. Okay, last thing, guys, almost done. We're going to bring both legs straight up above your hips, and I want you to just kind of glue your heels together. So the more you're squeezing together, you're going to work a little bit of adductors in this low part of your abs. Again, if your hamstrings are too tight, you can soften your knees a little bit. You don't have to keep them super straight. Okay? It is important to try to learn to just put your hands at your side and not tuck them under your low back or your glutes. Just keep them flat on your side and work on keeping your low back down to the floor as much as you can. So this is an extension of the tabletop where you're keeping that low back flat. We're going to make circles. Okay, so just small probably volleyball-sized circles here. And you're gonna inhale on the way down, no, a little bit lower. And then exhale, pull from your core on the way up. So this should be strictly about your abs, and especially this lower part here. So taking it really slow, make sure you're breathing, inhale on the way down, exhale on the way up. If you want to make it harder, you can bring your legs down to about 45 degrees and then go down from here. There you go. So down, around, exhale, pull. There you go. So the further down you go, the more challenging it is. The key here, though, is to keep your back flat. If your back arches up off the ground as you bring your legs down, switch directions, then you're not going to do yourself any favors. Your low back is going to be sore. It's going to hurt just a little bit. So keep this as much as you can in your abs and not in your low back. So you can always bring your legs back up higher to take the pressure off your low back. That's perfect. Let's go 2 more. So keep breathing, you guys. This is the last set. Let's do a set of 20 here, so 10 in each direction. Nice. And then pat yourself on the back because you completed your core workout for today.